most of these AI models are large language models, meaning that they only know words and vocabulary. And so what they're looking for are specific words.
Right. They only know the words of vocabulary that are taught to them.
Right.
Which I think a strategic job seeker can identify what those are. It's being taught by the company website. It's being taught by the job description. And so those are the same things that should be informing what goes into your resume, what goes into your cover letter, your application. Welcome to another episode of the NITW Podcast. I'm Sean. I'm joined here today with Joe. And our topic for today, we're going to be talking about job seeking and some advice and some insight for neurodivergent job seekers, in particular in the year 2025. It's a unique time to be in the job market, some unique challenges, some unique opportunities, and we want to talk about the experience we've had helping job seekers, as well as working with companies and working with their recruiters on what tools they're using, what approaches and strategies they use, and share some of those insights. So, Joe, welcome. And where I want to start is just kind of talking about the 2025 job market. There are some challenges, some limitations. Can you tell us what you're seeing and what job seekers should be aware of?
Yeah, it is a rough job market out there. So I think that we are seeing people applying to so many jobs, and all of employment goes in these cycles where it's either a employer's market or a job seeker's market. And right now it is definitely one of the most employer-focused or favored markets that I've ever seen. And I think that people are feeling that. People are seeing that applying to jobs can be really difficult right now, and it takes a lot of energy. So we have a lot of sympathy for that. And you're not alone. There's a lot of people who are working to find what they're going to do next. So, it's a very interesting time. The companies, large companies have gone through kind of some shedding of their numbers, some headcount reductions.
Which in previous times would create opportunity.
Right.
But right now it's kind of a shrink and stay down.
Right. Right. And if you are a job seeker, or if you know someone who's a job seeker, we want to bring some advice from our experience. We've worked with dozens and dozens of companies over the years through a neurodiversity inclusion lens. And so we want to kind of highlight some of the best practices specifically for neurodivergent job seekers and how to basically get ahead and understand this market that's going on.
Yeah, so I think we're acknowledging it's a tough market. There are a lot of job seekers out there. I think our goal is to share some insights so that anyone's job search can be a little bit more effective. So you hopefully have a bit more luck. It always takes some luck, but luck comes to those who are well prepared.
Yeah.
So, one thing that we wanted to talk about was the tools and technology that are unique to this time, that a lot of job seekers kind of feel like they're up against technology. AI is being infused into everything. A lot of employers are excited about that. How can we use AI to streamline things? And what that means, in my experience, speaking with recruiters, is, okay, if AI is being used to streamline the recruiting process, it means that fewer people are putting eyes on applications. And that poses some unique challenges. You are having resumes and applications screened by AI, which means they're looking for specific language, specific vocabulary. And I think that's something that a strategic job seeker would take into consideration with their application, with their resume, with whatever they're submitting, knowing, hey, at best, this is going to be seen by a person for a couple seconds, and more likely it's going to be thoroughly screened by a computer before I even have a chance to have a person look at it. So what does that AI screen mean for the job seeker? How can you kind of be more AI friendly in your application?
Yeah, well, I think, good question. I think that it drastically changes the strategy that it takes to get a job. If we kind of rewind a little bit to look at what the previous strategy would be, or the conventional wisdom in job applications, it's look for a job in a relevant industry that matches a job title that you either had or want or have the skills for, and go and look at those companies' openings and apply one by one, right? That can definitely still work, and it definitely does, right? But we have to start to challenge our notions that that's the best way to do it. Because unfortunately, it is now a both quality of application and quantity of application game that we're playing.
Right.
So we have to start to kind of view job seeking as a production line in a way.
Okay.
And so looking at it to, one, utilize AI to help us to do that. So there are some great AI tools that can help with resume revisions and suggestions and editing and cover letters as well, and also job search in general, but also understand what AI is looking for. So in that production line, looking at what they're going to screen for. And most of these AI models are large language models, meaning that they only know words and vocabulary. And so what they're looking for are specific words.
Right. They only know the words of vocabulary that are taught to them.
Right.
Which I think a strategic job seeker can identify what those are. It's being taught by the company website. It's being taught by the job description. And so those are the same things that should be informing what goes into your resume, what goes into your cover letter, your application.
Right, exactly. And there's a term that I like to use, which is called industry-specific language, right? So the idea that for each role, each industry, there is some keywords that are really helpful to know and to be able to communicate. And what this does for a human, not for AI, but for a human, it's like, okay, there's less risk in this hire because all jobs are essentially a risk for the manager. Am I going to hire someone who is going to be able to contribute, or are they going to be kind of someone who needs to be brought along slowly? They want the contributor, right? And so looking at what are some of those industry-specific language terms that allow someone to kind of glean some insight into, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. I'm not going to need to start from scratch. Even if you haven't had any industry experience, you can still look at that industry-specific language. So, for example, we all have seen, whether it's in college, university, high school, or in any career, that very quickly a bunch of acronyms start to pile up, right? So many acronyms. And so many people we've helped in onboarding kind of start to list out what the acronyms are and make definitions for them. But you can do that in some other more natural ways or like outsider ways.
Right. And if you know those in the interview, then I think that draws a straighter line for the interviewer to be like, oh, this person already knows A, B, and C, things that usually people learn when they're onboarding, and it gives them that more assurance of that risk, right?
Right.
That this person is already familiar with the subject matter. They're going to pick it up really easily and not be difficult for me to train up into the role.
Right, exactly. And you know, we challenge people to think about things that they already know really well and evaluate how they talk about those things. You're often going to use abbreviations, use common phrases to describe something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are sports fans. Sports has a whole
There's a whole
lingo,
vocabulary.
Right. And that's a good example of industry-specific language.
Totally.
If I say, okay, well, you know, they're 3-0, that's an industry-specific way of describing it, right? But the aerospace industry has their own version.
They have their own version of 3-0.
Education.
And it applies. Education,
graphic design, all of them.
TV, trains, like all of it.
Right.
There is a vocabulary in every industry and every area of interest. I think if you think about your own areas of interest, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a certain academic subject, like you can tell when somebody is familiar with it based on the way they talk about it, based on their vocabulary. So great. That is definitely an indicator, whether conscious or subconscious, in interviewers of what they're looking for. So, okay, what do we do with that knowledge? And I have a couple of suggestions with, okay, let's say I want to get into the graphic design industry. I haven't had experience there yet, but I want to seem like I'm knowledgeable. So that's the goal. So I want to build my industry-specific vocabulary. The way that I would approach that is trying to immerse myself in that vocabulary and in that culture. And there are some pretty attainable ways of doing that. If you're here, you're a person that listens to podcasts. And for every subject matter, there is a plethora of podcasts.
Everybody's got a podcast.
Exactly.
Including us.
If you want to sound like you're embedded in the neurodiversity topic, listening to this podcast you'll inevitably pick up some of that vocabulary. If you want to sound like you're embedded and experienced in the graphic design industry, find graphic design podcasts, just listen obsessively, immerse yourselves in them. Hopefully that's something you would enjoy anyways. And if not,
Right, if you're trying to get into that field,
maybe you want to change direction if that is, a deal breaker.
Right.
But yeah, podcasts, YouTube channels that are on that topic. These are all free resources, and you can kind of just like culturally immerse yourself.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Immerse yourself in that, and I think you'll absorb it, and the interviewer will inevitably be able to tell that you have at least picked up the vocabulary, and as we said, that's a really positive indicator.
Yeah, both the interviewer and the AI tools that the interviewers use are going to be picking up on that industry-specific language. And very often that's going to be in the job description, but the job description often gives you a very narrow window. One of the things that we learned quickly in doing this work is that oftentimes job descriptions are copied and pasted from the previous time a similar position was open, right?
And that was copied from the previous
Right.
time, and and it goes back to this was originally written in the 80s or
right,
something.
exactly. And so the language is not always 100% accurate just because this is just the process that is followed. And lots of companies do lots of updates to them, so it's not universal, but very often it is not a full window into what the job entails. And usually gives you a more generalist picture of what the company even does. So something to be aware of.
Yeah. So one other thing that I think we can clarify, shifting topics, is from our experience, who the players are, the stakeholders, and the various steps when one is applying to. We can speak to a lot of our partners that are kind of like national or global corporations, big organizations that have a big division of labor. If you think about, a mom and pop shop, you fill out a job application, it's probably the owner or the manager of this position that is end-to-end reviewing candidates, doing the interview, making a hiring decision. At a global company, that is almost definitely not the case. They have a whole HR department, they have a whole recruiting department, and all those steps get broken down. And the first owner of the step is the AI, is
Right.
the computer. So that's step one. But yeah, so what are the steps, and who are the people responsible for these steps? And I think for a job seeker, what I would want to know is, when am I actually talking to my manager?
Right. Yeah. So great question. And it's really important to kind of understand who the stakeholders are. So first, a job opens because a hiring team, determines that they need more help, right? They need a position filled. And so they're going to look at filling that headcount, and they're going to either first go to the division lead within that organization and say, hey, can you approve that we hire someone else? And they might say yes or no, depending on budget. Then that requisition, that job starts to get created, right? And then we will work with either HR or talent acquisition in larger organizations, or talent attraction, where we would see the company who start to divide that labor and say, okay, we have people whose job it is to purely try and get talent into the company. And so then that talent acquisition kind of looks at it strategically. They look at, okay, which AI tools can we use to get more candidates in? Where can we cultivate pipelines within X locations and job industries?
So I think one thing that I'm picking up from that that ties back to earlier is they're playing a quantity game, right? The AI is something that helps them. Initially, they want to have the biggest group of candidates to pull from, and then use those tools to, pry or parse that candidate pool down to the best ones. But they're playing a numbers game as well. So
it's a production game for them,
yeah,
just like it has to be for the job seeker, right? It's like, this is not, we're looking for Sean, we're looking for Joe as an individual. It's, we're looking for this many people to fit this specific role, or this industry expansion that we're working on, or even some to kind of just replace people who have left, right? All of these things is viewed more wholesale, more production picture. And so I think looking at, okay, which talent acquisition team is responsible for that? They're going to find the process, they're going to set up the process, and then they're going to work with the recruiters. Recruiters in larger companies and even in smaller companies, usually a company with more than 100 people will have some form of recruiting happening, whether it's a HR person's kind of job description or someone's title is recruiter. But very common thing where their job is to go out, recruit candidates, make people apply, but also screen those candidates into the next round.
So the recruiter picks up after the AI, and the AI is handling the biggest pool of applicants. The recruiter is handling the largest pool of human interactions. So that second step where we're actually calling people, maybe having an introductory phone call, that's where the recruiter steps in on actual human-to-human contact. But that is a smaller pool than the original applicants.
Exactly. And we're generalizing here. Obviously, there's always going to be a different pathway.
Yeah.
But a recruiter can also help target specific areas. So say, for example, a company has a location in a very rural area of the country or the world. A recruiter might start to look at, okay, which ways of communicating out to the community that we want people to apply should we figure out, and then work with that AI tool. And then once the AI tool starts screening, the recruiter takes over and looks at, okay, let's evaluate who we should advance to the next round. And usually what they do is they'll meet with the hiring team directly. The recruiter will, and say, what are you looking for? Tell me the ideas. And they're judged on how many quality candidates they can provide to that team that's hiring, right? They're not necessarily judged on the specific individuals. Again, it's a production line. It's how many people can we bring to this so that the manager has a good choice to make, or good options to make the best choice. And then we get to the recruiter often does a screening call with people. Mm-hmm. And this is where we get a lot of kind of confusion starts to pop up, because people think, okay, I have an interview at X company with a recruiter. But there's a difference, a subtle difference, but there's a difference in talking to a recruiter and the actual interview. What I like to see is the recruiter is just kind of doing a screening call. They're like, do you meet the basic qualifications? Because our AI tool is kind of taking a very broad stroke, right?
Yeah.
And screening people out.
Yeah.
Or
Are you a
applicant tracking
citizen?
system.
Are you in the right geography?
Right.
Have you graduated from the school that you said you graduated from?
Are you a human and not an AI bot that's applying to things, right?
A valid thing.
And so that's what they're going to do. And what we find is that it's still important to prepare for that conversation, but understand what they're aiming for. They're aiming for qualifiers. Do you meet the qualifications for this? They're not going to really necessarily retain all of the subtle details as to why you're the best candidate for the role, right? But they're going to say, okay, this person is a good candidate, a great candidate, or they are not a good candidate, and screen you out. So that's kind of gate one, right?
Yeah.
Or gate two, really, after the applicant tracking system and AI.
One thing that I would say is positive about the kind of superficialness of that first screening call is I would want job seekers to keep one thing in mind, that the recruiter is usually responsible for anywhere from 10 to 40 positions.
Right.
So yes, you applied to, let's say, one role. You're having this conversation with a recruiter, and they're not going to make a hiring decision one way or another. But I think it gives you an opportunity to show a little bit of breadth of who you are, right? You want to, make the case that you have all the skills that they want for this particular position. That's best case scenario one. But I think it's important when talking to a recruiter to keep your options open and let them know that you really like this company, and if they have anything else that they're looking to fill, that you're open to being pivoted by them based on their best judgment. Because often they know, Joe has applied for position A, and he's kind of in the middle of the pack, but I wish that I could move Joe to position C. And if you say, I'm open to anything, then that recruiter might take the initiative to put you in position C, where you would have a better chance.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so forming that relationship with a recruiter can be so critical, so helpful. Making sure that they understand what you're looking for, what your skill sets are. So I think that's like those first couple of gates. And then if a recruiter determines that you are a good match, they're going to only put forward the best candidates out of the pool on their evaluation, right? And then they're going to move you to likely a hiring team, the team that you would work with, and their interview process. Mm-hmm. This is where you actually first meet with people who you would potentially work with. And it's not always directly the people. Some companies, if again, they're viewing it as a production line, they might have a hiring team who sit in on all the hiring decisions and then assign you to a role later, right?
Right.
But looking at that and coming to that interview, then that's when you start to get a little bit more of a personalized strategy can start to play out, where you can demonstrate some skills. And this is one of our recommendations for neurodivergent candidates is skill demonstration can be really easy because every interview process is reliant on this kind of old-fashioned, outdated, back and forth.
Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, tell me about yourself and tell me about a time when you X, right? And they're kind of silly questions, and a lot of what we do is kind of advising that without a clear structure to an interview process, companies are making relatively poor decisions on who should be hired. And so a skill-based hiring process, which we implement in our work for companies, can be really helpful. But you can also start to do that as an individual candidate by highlighting your specific skills and letting your skills do the communication for you, especially if you're someone who has a lot of anxiety in an interview, which if you care about something, why wouldn't you have a lot of anxiety? Anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. And so how do you do that? What do you think is the best way to get to illustrating those skills?
So what I hear most often and what a lot of people default to is you show your skills by answering questions in a STAR method. Mm-hmm. And you can look that up elsewhere. That's well and good, but I think that's not the best answer that I would give a job seeker. What we try to do in our hiring programs, like you said, where we get to structure the interview in a skill-based way, that's great, and we get to control that process, but you won't always be in that situation. You might be with a company that's never heard of skill-based hiring, but you can take that initiative a little bit, and if you have past examples of your work, a capstone project in college, a personal project that you took on to kind of learn a new skill, or maybe a volunteer opportunity where you use the same types of skills that you would use in this role. Those are all examples of demonstrated skills. And you can kind of take the initiative to say, yeah, I actually have done this before. Let me tell you about this project. And what I think is really great about that is, one, it's direct for the interviewer to see exactly what they're looking for, the exact skills, whether it's a coding language, whether it's an accounting software, whether it's, experience in like marketing communications, graphic design, all these different things. You can demonstrate any of those things from your past work that you can do, from an internship to a personal project. Doesn't have to be professional experience, but when you plan on presenting that, you get to plan. And so it does help relieve some of that anxiety and nervousness by knowing, hey, I have familiarized myself, I've prepared these past project examples, and I'm going to make sure that I can share my screen or at least tell them about these past examples. And I think for some job seekers, that feels like kind of stepping out of line and saying, oh, let me take over the interview and show you what I've done. And I can say, as a sometimes interviewer, please take it over. Show me your work. That makes my job easier. It gives me better information. If I'm doing an old school interview and I'm trying to ask these behavioral questions and pry out the details of your skills indirectly, I'm going to be frustrated with that. If you take the initiative to say, I actually have a PowerPoint that shows my past work, or I have a portfolio website, let me just share my screen, I'm going to welcome that opportunity. So don't be nervous about taking that initiative to share your past work. And I mentioned portfolios there. That's a big topic that we talk about a lot. A portfolio, to kind of define it if you're unfamiliar, is any kind of artifact, any kind of compilation that shows past examples of your work, ideally work that requires the use of the skills that you need for this particular role. And so basically it's a book of showing that you have the skills, showing what you can do rather than telling. So Joe, can you tell us, I know you've helped people develop portfolios. What does that look like in different industries? What tools or platforms can people use? What does a portfolio look like? Is it a book? Is it a binder? Is it a PowerPoint? What is it?
Well, it can be any of those things. And people, when they think of portfolio, they think of a couple of things. First, they think photographer and their portfolio, which is a great example, but the most common. But you can do it in literally every industry. And so we see it a lot for the tech industry. So people who have examples of their work, they'll have it in GitHub, which is a common kind of repository of how you share code, but you can also create your own projects and project descriptions in there that can be really helpful in an interview process. And having that really developed allows you to do what you just said of, let me show you my work instead of trying to explain it. Because if we look at even the most simple tech skills, let's look at Microsoft Excel. If I say I'm proficient in Excel, right?
Sure.
That's a really wide statement. And my definition of proficiency could be I can make the columns straight and the same size.
Hey,
Or
when you figure out that auto size
Yeah.
or your first sum,
Right.
it feels great.
Right, and that could be my definition of proficiency, but I know no formulas.
Right.
Right, but other proficiency in Excel could be really advanced. You can do some amazing things there, right? And do macros and lots of data management, right? But showing that is going to be much more effective than trying to describe it, because in an interview process, there's almost this strange double standard that happens where interviewers, the people who are doing the interview, who have the job, expect you to do some sort of slight exaggeration as to what your skills are. That's what people do. They try to show themselves. And then for the interviewee, that's also expected. And so we are kind of having this communication that doesn't necessarily represent what's real, whereas a portfolio does. So anyway, to answer your question, there's lots of ways of developing it for every field. You mentioned a PowerPoint. I think that's great. If you're in finance, or if you're in graphic design, or if you're in program management, or even simple like administrative tasks, illustrating that in a PowerPoint of some of your core skills can be so productive. And like you said, you can steer the conversation in an interview with the recruiter, or a screening call with the recruiter, or an interview with the team in saying, let me answer your question by showing you some of my past work. This is really helpful, allows people to visually see what you're capable of, and give them a kind of qualifier as to what level of comfort you have with those skills, right? So it can be in anything. And a simple example of the structure of that PowerPoint would be a title slide with your name on it, maybe with what industry you're aiming for, and then a couple of projects. And the projects could be from college. You don't have to say this was for my X class and my professor gave me a B+. Like, you could give the example of the project that if it's industry specific. But if you don't have a lot of experience, I guess I'll phrase the question back to you. How do you fill out that portfolio?
I think that I've not found an industry where someone can't develop some of their own experience, whether it's software development. It's pretty easy to just kind of say, well, here's a potential problem. Let me develop an application that would solve it. Nobody's asking me to, but I'm gonna do it for my own benefit. And that's as valid of a skill demonstration as if, your manager at Microsoft told you to do that. You're still using the same skills. You're still developing the same solution. So that's one. I mean, if you think of art, right? There is often not an impetus for why I took this photo or made this painting, but it goes in my portfolio. You're doing it on your own and collecting these artifacts of your work and compiling them into your portfolio. Where it gets a little bit more difficult would be industries like, let's say, finance, where you need kind of real world data to work with. In order to do a finance, right? In order to do a budget, to do a projection, like, you have to have something to work with. But we live in a world where data is everywhere. Data.gov is somewhere we go all the time, or even just Kaggle, or just do a Google search for like mock data set or stock data. Any of these things you can download for free and work with, giving yourself a prompt and working with that. Another that I think can be a little bit challenging might be something like project management. So let's say project management is you're trying to develop your portfolio. Sometimes you need to work within a hypothetical. And that applies for software, that applies for finance, that applies for project management. And there's nothing wrong with saying, here's a hypothetical scenario. I'm going to develop a expansion project plan for this fictitious company that wants to open a new location. I'm going to lay out these different steps, stakeholders, budget, etc. That demonstrates a lot of the same skills. It's not in the real world, sure, but it still checks a lot of those same competencies that someone would be looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have that, this, like you mentioned, allows you to prepare in advance. And this is a game changer in an interview process, right? If you can say, this is how I'm going to review these slides that I've already made, or this GitHub, or this portfolio, it can be really productive to be able to say, okay, I now have at least partially a game plan for how this interview is going to go, instead of just kind of preparing for everything and trying to pretend like you're fine with the questions
Yeah,
going
just
anywhere,
just
right?
winging it with wherever,
Right.
giving them the full control of where are we going to go with this conversation. You never know.
Right.
But yeah, this gives you an opportunity to prepare, kind of know what you're going to say, know where you're going to take the conversation. It's really helpful. One other thing I wanted to say about portfolios, and then I wanted to touch on one more topic. When it comes to portfolios, they're only as good as you share them. And that sentence doesn't make grammatical sense, but I'll explain what I mean. You can make a portfolio, but if people don't see it, then it's not doing you any good.
Right.
So what I often advise people, we've talked about in the interview, right? You want to take the initiative and say, can I show you something from my portfolio? They're going to say yes, so go ahead and do that. But also you can passively put it everywhere you would put your contact information. So it should be on your resume up at the top with your email, your phone number, your city, and your portfolio. I look for that when I open a resume. Like, is there a portfolio here? Because sometimes that makes my job easier for screening what somebody's skills or applied experiences with those skills are. So on your resume, you want it in your email signature, you want it highlighted on your LinkedIn profile, you want it basically anywhere you would share your contact information, you want to have your portfolio available, because I find myself, whenever I'm trying to get to know a candidate and assess them, I look for that link, and that is going to somebody's portfolio is usually easier for me as a screener than having to sift through their resume. So that's one thing that I would advise everybody to keep in mind. Once your portfolio is where you like it and you're proud to share it as often and everywhere.
Right.
So one other topic I wanted to cover is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn gets talked about a lot as this ultimate, networking tool. You're not going to get a job if you don't have LinkedIn connections. You have to be messaging thought leaders and recruiters. And I can say I am awful at checking my LinkedIn messages. I don't know many people that are like really actively answering strangers on LinkedIn. So I would push back a little bit on that. But there is a little bit to the value of LinkedIn, and something that I have learned from our company partners that I think a lot of people are not aware of is resumes can be a little bit, just as files that get shared, can be a little bit of a red flag for some companies, because they're trying to watch out for data protection, not storing anybody's personal information, and a resume has name, email, sometimes your address. They don't want that information.
Right, and if I can jump in, I think that like when we look at that information, there's rules surrounding how they have to handle applicants to a job, and there's rules in the U.S., there's rules in Europe, there's rules everywhere, right? And it helps. It's very helpful to have those rules for protections for employers, and you want to be able to see if this person applied, did they get the job or not, right? And so if you're applying to a specific job, very often in larger companies especially, that job is on file, or that resume is on file for that job. And unless you're talking to a recruiter and developing that relationship, it doesn't necessarily transfer to another job. And you're in a different pipeline. You're in a different talent pool. And so like you're saying, LinkedIn, well, you can continue. LinkedIn.
Sure. So LinkedIn is much more shareable,
Right,
for all the opposite reasons. It's hosted online. It doesn't share your direct contact information, but it has a complete profile of your education, your work history, your skills. You can highlight past projects. You can link your portfolio. You should link your portfolio.
Right.
And you even get a cute little headshot in there, and people really get a sense of who you are. It gets at least as much information as your resume, but it's so much easier for organizations to share internally. So as you said, it opens you up to multiple opportunities. And there are some companies that won't even necessarily look at your resume. They sometimes just go straight to LinkedIn first. So that doesn't mean that you need to be super active on LinkedIn, but it does mean that your profile needs to be fully put together, polished. It needs to have all the images next to your school and work history, a complete, filled out list of your skills, which you have to enter in there. It takes a little bit of time, but then it's always in there. It's
Right.
great. So,
and your skills include what we mentioned earlier, that industry-specific language, right?
Definitely.
The specific terminology for the industry that you're looking at. And LinkedIn can be just kind of a polished version of your general aim based off of that industry-specific language. So maybe, do you have any other topics, or I was going to recap
we can
strategy?
recap. We can
Okay.
recap. We've covered a lot. I
Yeah.
think a quick little,
So what I'm thinking, if you look at the job application process, we know that it is an employer's market, meaning there are more candidates applying to roles than typical. And we also see that they're using new processes for deciphering which candidates they bring forward. So we need to change our strategy. We need to play it like the production it is, right? We need to look at it as an assembly line, as a production. And so there's some core ways to do that. One, if I'm looking at the strategy from a high level for a job seeker, it's first determine a couple of different areas that you're targeting, right? It is looking at the specific industry specific language. I said specific a lot, but looking at what you're aiming for and maybe having a couple different versions of your resume ready to go.
Because you know that first layer is an AI screen for keywords.
Right.
So you want to make sure that your resume is optimized with all of those keywords that you can think of, to put in for this particular role. And keep in mind that those keywords might be a little bit different from role A to role B to role C. And you might be good for all of these roles, but you want to make sure that the application for role A is optimized for role A, the application for B is optimized for role B. And I don't think you need to go as far as some people say, which is to tailor your resume, your cover letter for every single application. I think you just need 3 to 5 versions that are, are you applying for, I see candidates that could be applying for data science, could be applying for software engineering, could be applying for project management with all the same skills, same person, but the screener for those 3 roles is going to be looking for different things. So that candidate would want 3 versions of their resume that's optimized for those 3 different screens.
Yeah, or it could be you're looking at 3 or 4 different industries where you're interested in. Like maybe you are looking to enter the nonprofit sector, or maybe you're looking for a governmental role. And using some of that industry-specific field general language, again, in those different catered buckets can be really helpful. And again, looking at it in a production assembly line of you're going to put in nice, neat order 5 different versions of your resume and portfolio together, and then you're going to send them out, right? And this is where some of the conventional wisdom can be tricky, because I think that previously in a job seeker favored market, it's quality over quantity. And it's like, let's make sure that I'm completely aligned with this position and role, and I'll probably get the job, right? But in an employer-favored market, it is, unfortunately, quality and quantity. Yep. And so the numbers, especially with tools like AI filtering through people very quickly, they need to be much higher. And so if you're applying to 6 jobs a month, that's way too low. Yep. You need a larger number than you think, and I can't give you a specific number, but it's as large as possible, right? And they also need to be catered. And so that's why we are suggesting looking at it as a production line, because what we tend to do, all of us, if we're applying to a job, we look at the job, we look at the location, we read the job description, and then we go down this imaginary road where we're like, I wonder what it would be like to drive to work every day. Let me Google where that company is located. Let me look more about what other people say about this company online, right?
And then you're going too far into quality.
Yeah, you're going
and losing some of the quantity because you just spent an hour and a half on this one application.
Right, and you might be really excited, and that's great. Use that excitement, but use it to apply to the next job.
Right, right.
So then you get to that quality and quantity that in a year you want hundreds of applications. Yeah. If not thousands, but hundreds.
So other points that we hit today were the different steps, right? Where step 1 is usually going to be an AI screen, mostly driven by keywords that are present in your application. Very important to keep in mind. You got to get through that to actually talk to a person. That first person that you talk to, which feels to you like the first step, but it's really the second. That person is usually a recruiter. It's not the manager for the position. They're just kind of checking some general boxes of logistics, basic qualifications. You might go through even like 2 rounds of that before you meet with the actual team responsible for the role. But then when you do get to that team, that is where you will meet with maybe the manager for the position, maybe somebody parallel with the position that, could be like a colleague, or it could be a level up, like a department director that is responsible for the team that is hiring. But regardless, it's somebody that is more directly aligned with the position. And that's where you can have more of a real like person-to-person conversation and share your portfolio and talk about your skills and past projects. That's where you really get to get into the depth of your skills there. And then we also gave an overview of portfolios, what they are, why they're important, how to use them in the interview process. Anything else on portfolios?
Well, yeah, I think that a couple of FAQs that come up surrounding portfolios is how do I create my own projects? Like we mentioned, you can Google it. You can say, what's a project in X industry?
Yeah, finance practice project, Google.
And AI is really good at this too. You can use AI to say, create a skill demo so that I can prove these skills to a hiring manager for me, hit enter, and it gives you a nice skill demo.
Yep.
Really helpful. But then, okay, there's a couple of other FAQs that come to mind. If people are in the software industry in any way, one of the biggest complaints in a employer-favored markets is the coding test. And what we have to realize for these coding tests is that this is a kind of in-between step between maybe recruiter or interviewer, or sometimes even pre-recruiter. And this is, again, qualifying people, doing the same thing that a portfolio does, but with much broader of a categorization. So it's basically, does this person understand X tool to X degree? And it's kind of like if you've taken a standardized test, like an SAT or an LSAT or all of them. There's a different way of approaching it than normal, and you can study for those in advance. You can say, okay, what are common coding test questions that I can look up in advance? It shouldn't catch you by surprise when you get there and it's telling you to label a decision matrix tree or like how do you do a join function in SQL, right? These are common things that you can look up and prepare in advance for. So I always recommend doing that if you're in the software
That was
industry.
some really good industry-specific
Thank you.
language. Nice job. We're not software developers.
I
If you couldn't tell.
I could not pass that test, but I know that it will be on the test, right? So yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that we've covered a lot of good information. Hopefully the job seekers out there, this helps motivate you, give you some direction, some ability to better prepare yourself and maybe, tame some of that anxiety. We wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode.
And if you are a neurodivergent job seeker, please go to our website, nitw.org/join our talent database, where you can enter in your information and we will alert you of jobs that relate to your skills. We go out, find the jobs, and bring them to people. And that's what we spend all of our time doing. So yeah, please make sure to go there. But also comment on any other strategies that you found really helpful in this very employer-centered market. I think that forming a community, helping people to know that this is a full-time job, it's exhausting, and our recommendation of both quality and quantity is also exhausting, but it is the reality of the situation. It won't always stay like this. The market will turn. It's a cycle. And at that point, it's going to be a whole different set of rules. But right now, that's where we are.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear from you all. Thanks again.
Thank you.